So I promised you all last week that today we would um, kind of be exploring a little bit something that actually requires snow. And usually about around this time every year, I'll do this sort of theme that we're going to do today. And often there is snow on the ground, but there is no snow here in New England. So the theme that we're looking at really has to do with the time of year that we're in. Certainly, we know the human climate, if you will, the colonization of our consciousness of so much that's happening out there in DC and in other parts of the country. And what I'd like to encourage us to do, especially this time of year, is to think about the natural world as an anchor, as a rootedness to come back to. It's so easy to lose touch with that rootedness of our home and the environment and the landscape that we're in and what the natural world is doing right now, which totally goes missed usually. Every year during this time, many of us continue to work and produce and be busy. Um, and in fact, generally speaking, what the season that we're in right now is what the Native Americans originally called the hunger season, which is that time of year where there was very little activity in nature and therefore there was very little food. And so the task for for example, the Eastern Woodland Native Americans in our area in New England, as well as other parts of the Northern Plains, would use this time as a time to sort of exert very little energy to mirror the natural world in such a way that it was a time of cultivation. Um, and largely it was a necessity because food was scarce. Animals hibernating, very little activity in the depth of the natural year, which ideally is where we are now. Um, and as human beings, we're constantly trying to produce and charging forward with our lives as if there is no winter. And we may enjoy the winter, but how much do we actually mirror that natural process? And sort of as a California boy who moved to New England, I had lived in New York for about 10 years. I was born in Connecticut and moved when I was 2. I lived in West Virginia where there was snow, and so on. But something about moving here after having been in California later on all those years, I really, for some reason, had a hard time adjusting to the cold, to the short days, to the winter. And so I decided that, okay, what is it that's really happening here in the natural world? I remember hiking, going out to Broadmoor and Natick, one of my favorite hiking areas, and tentatively stepping on the ice on the trail and slipping and sliding until I saw real New England people just marching through, just boots up and down heartily. And I thought, okay, I'm definitely acclimating here to the environment. And so, following suit, I learned how to find my gravity. But what was more difficult were the short days. And when we're in this season of shortened days, which are now starting to become lighter again, um, it became important for me to kind of listen to what is possible in what we might call the hush of winter in the natural world. This kind of hush, this quiet um, sort of potentiality that has gone within in the earth, and how easy it is to lose that when our consciousness is colonized by continuing to produce and do things. In many ways, we can say that the natural world is probably at its utmost peaceful this time of year. And in my opinion, one thing that some of you have heard me say this over the last several years is this time of year, I feel like we need to have a holiday for peace. We need to have a holiday that celebrates this dimension of the natural world being still, being peaceful, being quiet, and being reflective. After the holidays, after the new year, when things really do go dormant in the natural world, that we too can sort of celebrate the inner light, revel, if you will, in the inner light, and cultivate a sort of a reclamation of all that outward directed energy so that we can abide in a way that mirrors the vitality that has gone dormant in the natural world and that is regenerating itself quietly until spring comes. How wonderful if we could live that way, especially if we live in a cold northern climate. Now, that doesn't mean that we need to just quit jobs and stop doing things, but it does, I think, cause us to reflect a little bit, to maybe go a little bit more easily on ourselves. The natural world is telling us this after all. And in Buddhism, certainly we have this notion of inner luminosity, that the luminosity of mind is fundamentally sort of clear, refined, bright, and it's subtle. So this time of year can really be a blessing to remember. Maybe we take a little bit more time off, we do a retreat for even a weekend, and just abide in that reveling of the inner light during the hush of winter. So for me, the darkness that comes with this time of year, the sun going down early and such, has actually been a really lovely way to embrace what darkness can offer us and a way to sort of cultivate an inner luminosity that is not instead of the darkness, but rather also embraces the darkness as a time for cultivating potentiality, if you will, the unmanifest of our vitality in seed form that is dormant and going inward. So, this inner gaze, if we can allow through our practice of shamatha, mindfulness, the inner gaze to be open and flexible and quiet and very present as the mind settles, and of course that's the challenge, is sort of engaging with a mind that is still really active, that has a momentum that's just going and going, to recognize the field of stillness that's there in potential form and allow ourselves to settle in, to sort of sink into this depth that is there and not to be afraid of it. And that's the other thing that we often encounter is, wow, well, Chris, I get it that we have this kind of inner sort of core of radiance and luminosity, but I can't go there. You know, I have too much baggage that I'm carrying, too much pain in my pain body, too much woundedness and trauma. And yet, and yet, alongside all of those things that we carry is this very quiet, still place that is bright. So the Buddhist teachings are very clear with this, not to be deceived by the clouds that form and then get caught up in the cloudiness of our thoughts and all the things that are causing us suffering. The other thing, too, is that has been coming up for me lately around some of this is that how we hold the situation that we feel like the world is in now or our lives are in now really matters. How we hold it determines what we create afterwards. Does that make sense? This is our call to path, our call to practice, our call to the path itself, is to consider that how we're holding all of this turmoil, whether it's going on inside of us or we're witnessing it on the news, how we hold it determines what we then can contribute to create in the long run, in the long arc of things. And so in Buddhism, we call this sort of like trying to discern the middle path in our practice. What does it mean to come back to the middle path? So, for the same token, how we hold the light, how we hold this luminosity, determines to what degree perhaps we're able to cultivate this on the path. The Buddha talked often about the lamp that is our consciousness. And what's interesting is that the lamp of our seeing, of our awareness that illuminates objects, things we see, also illuminates itself. It's self-luminous. So we call this in Buddhism, we call this the bhavanga, this term of bhavanga, which is this ground luminosity, this sort of ground presence that we cultivate in meditation. And it's not a complicated thing, although it can feel that way. It's actually quite self-evident. It is what we experience in the utmost simplicity, when everything is quiet, when stillness leads to just sort of abiding calmly in a concentrative attention on breath, on body, on the spaciousness of our the room we're in or our own mind, and the silence that arises, that is that effortless presence that simply is present just on its own. And mindfulness helps us to get there.